UFC Vegas, Fight Club TV. I am Kyle, your host. Welcome to the podcast. And today we're going to talk about something a little bit different than we normally do. A lot of the times we have fun on here. We talk about betting, talk about, certain upcoming big fights, super fights, really the entire MMA world we talk about, and the UFC specific in general. So if you like that, subscribe, like, comment on this video, get involved in Fight Club. But today what we're really going to be talking about is a little bit different of a tone. And I think it's something that maybe is worth diving into the more that these kind of conversations come up. And it's really having to do more with the treatment of fighters within the UFC and how things have really changed, I think, with the more mainstream that the UFC becomes. The new fan base that comes into the UFC. And I think a lot of that stuff changes the tone sometimes of what happens with fan interaction with fighters. Now, Cajon Johnson recently came out and said, after his fight at Volkov versus Verdum, Fight Night 127, and he had a pretty tough fight against Stevie Ray, close fight, ended up getting the victory, Cajon Johnson. And afterwards, he ended up getting an interview. Obviously, he's the winner. And a lot of boos came out. And, he's trying to do this interview. Boos came out. And, I'm going to read a quick part of what he had said at the interview. And then I'm going to read to you also what he had said afterwards at the press conference. So, one of the things he said, he was asked, about the fight, and he got right into the fact of how people were booing and the treatment of fighters. So he said, there is no respect in mixed martial arts anymore. We deserve nothing but respect for fighting and bleeding for you. Anything less is disrespectful and disgraceful, and you should be ashamed of yourself. So that was what he had said to the crowd with the microphone in his face. And part of me at first is, you're a fighter. You're a fighter, deal with it. It is kind of like anything else where if you're an actor and people don't like the character you are or something like that, and then they kind of treat you poorly because they believe you're that kind of character. Here, fighting is the purest form of any kind of competition. And there's no fluff. It's just two men standing in the ring, exchanging punches, kicks, or whatever it is that their discipline is, to finish the other guy. Nothing else. You can't blame a quarterback. You can't blame an outfielder. You know what I mean? You can't blame a goalie. It's you and one other person, which is why I love the sport so much, is because it's really just two guys going at it, clashing, whether they've got different sets of skills or whatever it may be. It is very, very interesting to me to see how the game plan comes into play, how they game plan for the specific things that another opponent does, and it's just two people in the ring imposing a role on each other. Somebody's got to come out a winner, and that's the way it is. Now, of course, every fight can't be a Rocky Balboa, Drago fight. It just can't happen. Even people who, there's times where I've watched the UFC with people who don't really watch the UFC much, and they're like, oh man, this fight, nothing really happened, and they're just laying on each other. And people don't realize what's going on in there, and how they're jockeying for position, how they're moving around, and how, and if you really listen to Joe Rogan, obviously a lot of you follow the UFC, MMA as a whole, the disciplines, how things transpire on the ground, you're really able to follow along with that. So people who don't follow along with that, or the middle of the road people that follow along with the UFC, don't really understand, the clinch game, or when somebody's on the ground and the full guard, half guard, how they're, the rubber guard, how they're moving for position. And a lot of times people just think they're just landing on each other. And that could get to boos. So when you get people that don't really fully grasp the entire, culture and sport of the UFC, things like booing can happen. Now, is it lack of education of the sport that people just want to see, gore? They want to see a guy get knocked out. They want to see a choke out. They want to see a finish. And then it's funny because then it's, if there's a very quick finish and somebody maybe is a casual fan and there's a knockout in 20 seconds, people are like, oh, that's it? you can't please everybody. People want a war every fight. People want, an all-out slugfest, and that's not going to happen. Depending on the disciplines, it's not going to happen. So those kind of things can definitely make it tough for fighters who are just trying to get the victory. That's what matters to them. Some people, of course, yes, they want the showmanship, they want the big knockout, they want the $50,000 bonus, they want, fight of the night, they want a memorable moment because that's where it's heading. And of course, you get a great knockout, you're going to be a little bit more in the front page news of MMA media. So you may get a better fight, or you may get paid more, or however that works on the contract side of things. But afterwards, it started to make me think after Cajon Johnson talked, then afterwards he had a little bit more to say and kind of, I think, gave more of, the insight to a fighter that does this for a living, that bleeds for a living, and takes punches and kicks to the face for a living, day in and day out, in the gym, or whether he's actually competing, he's putting his body through torture to get to a point that he's very comfortable with going out and competing and beating other mixed martial artists. So Cajon Johnson said, and this was afterwards, he said, "I have a bit of an issue with the fans of mixed martial arts because of the way they treat the fighters. In my opinion, it stems from the top. A lot of the time you'll see Dana White giving the fighters so much grief. If you don't go out, just sling leather and bleed for them, then he's talking all this smack. And because the leader of the organization acts like this, then it's so much easier for the fans to act like this. So it really upsets me, and it's a huge problem I have with it." So he's now more pointing the finger more towards Dana White and saying, listen, Dana White is a guy that, very rich man, brilliant marketing guy, brilliant visionary when it came to this sport, buying this sport for few million, whatever it may be, selling it for billions, and really being able to push this sport from just barbaric, no rules, no rounds, basically you do what you want early on in this, to now it is a legitimate sport, it's mainstream, you've got boxers wanting to get in on it, you've got a lot of athletes now, you've even had some football players do this, obviously not high-level football players, but you've had people get into this sport and enjoy the combat part of it. Now, it brings me to the question of, is Dana White at fault? Is he ruining the UFC with how he is building this culture around the treatment of fighters? And without a doubt, there is part of that. I really believe that there is part of it. I mean, Dana White can do what he wants. He can absolutely do what he wants. I mean, I guess now he sold it, so I'm sure there's limitations to certain things, but he can do what he wants. He can say what he wants to an extent. He can, rile up a fighter by saying certain things. He doesn't have to muzzle his mouth and say, well, I have to be very political. But it's also, you've got fighters out. He's not a fighter. He's never been a fighter. And I think a huge part of this has to do with that, because I've heard many times that fighters who have issues with Dana White, and I'm sure you guys know there's so many of them. I'm going to get into one other one, but there's so many of them, and they're saying he's never been in the fight. He's never been in the cage. Does he train? I'm sure he does. Does he go in and do mixed martial arts? I don't really think he's fully invested in something like that, like a Joe Rogan, who is an unbelievable announcer and analyst, and he just does a phenomenal job. He is in it. He's whatever belt he is, and he has progressed. I mean, I don't know if you've seen recent videos of him throwing kicks. I mean, the guy is very talented when it comes to mixed martial arts. Not only does he just speak it, he knows it, he trains it, he lives it. But then you've got Dana White, who's telling these guys, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to go in there and fight, you got to go, and knocking fighters for not fully going out and just brawling. And at the end of the day, this is their career. This is something this is how they pay, they put food on the table for their family. This is how they do that. So it can't always be a showmanship. It can't always be a position where you got to knock this guy out. This guy's got to get knocked out. And, people want that. You see that. You've seen even Mike Perry out there, who is, definitely a raw talent in the UFC. But he goes out there and he's trying to get that spectacular moment where he had gotten maybe 2, 3 in a row, great knockouts, very athletic guy who's going to continually do well in the UFC. But his last fight, that's all he looked for. He talked about it. He wanted a big highlight reel moment. He wants to get the glamour that comes with a big knockout on a big stage. He wants that, and they all want that. But if you lose, that hurts you 10 times more. Instead of just trying to go out, implementing a plan, trying to get the victory, whether it's not as pretty or as sexy of a win that you can talk about it and it can be this big knockout and everyone's, oh, what a spinning heel kick that he knocked this guy out and wow, and people could talk about it up until the next event. No, if you kind of go in there and you bang around, you are able to win 2 of 3 rounds and get the decision, it's not a memorable moment, but you get the win. At the end of the day, that's what it's about, getting a win. So even, and the other one that I want to bring up is even with Woodley, with Tyron Woodley. Now, Woodley against Stephen Thompson. Now, people had the first fight was the first fight. It was a good fight. Second fight, a lot of it, Woodley just kind of stayed back. Woodley stayed back. There wasn't much action. There wasn't much exchanging going on. And that's not because these guys aren't good. I mean, Woodley is a world champion. Wonderboy Thompson is maybe one of the best karate, with the discipline of karate in the UFC by far. So, I mean, you've got guys like that he's got his discipline. Woodley is worried about many of the striking angles and range that Thompson can come at him with, so he had to have a different game plan. It was not this amazing fight that we were all hoping it would be, but people booed. Dana White kind of knocked him a little bit and said he's one of the more boring fighters, and other people then started piggybacking that comment and said, hey, Woodley's boring. And then Woodley kind of has gotten a little bit of a bad rap about that. But you go back a couple fights, he's not, I mean, his fight against Lawler, I mean, what a fight that was. I mean, he's got so many other ones that were great fights. So it's not going to be this highlight reel knockout that's going to go consistently through. And it does put a bad taste in some of the fans' mouths when they hear Dana White saying it. So I definitely agree to a point that Dana White is responsible for how the fans react when you hear him many, many times knocking fighters, and he's not a fighter. So it's, even myself here, I analyze things. You can talk down somebody's skill set. You can talk down, all these guys can kick every one of our butts. But what we like to do is I enjoy the sport. I try to analyze it the way that I am fit to with how long I've watched MMA for. But to disrespect fighters or to talk down a fighter or that he's doing this or it starts to make, again, people really think differently about a fighter in general. And I think Cajon is right to an extent where he's saying, if it starts at the top and Dana White is mocking all these fighters and it's all about, you got to get the knockout, and then you're kind of ruining your own product where Dana White is saying that. And then there's been many times I've watched a great card and there was not really many knockouts, and the fans may be booing or whatever it may be, and they're actually now at the point where they're saying, the fans are saying that, oh, it wasn't a good card. And I'm reading some of these things, man, that was a great card. To me, mixed martial arts at any level is going to be different. It's a fight. It is a fight. It's not a movie. It's not a play. It's not, we're not going to have these dramatic moments all the time. We will, and when we do have them, they're amazing, and it brings, the storyline of 2 fighters going at it a lot further. It definitely does. But when you've got a position where a guy is the past owner of the company, built this company, and sold it and has made a fortune off it, but still having the leverage to say something like that. I mean, it's almost like, if the commissioner of the NFL, if there was some games that were just complete blowouts and they weren't very good, the whole week of football, and there's a bunch of blowouts and not many great fights, does the commissioner start to knock the Cleveland Browns? and say, hey, Cleveland Browns are terrible. Geez, they can't win a game. These guys are horrible. Why are they even out there? They got to try better. Everyone's trying to win. When you're in a professional sport, everyone wants to win. Everybody wants to win. So it's not a lack of preparation, of talent, of any of those things, of game planning. It's you got to play off of what's been given to you, whether you're a fighter, whether you're an NFL player, whether you're a baseball player, whatever it is, you have to adapt to those situations and hopefully come out on top at the end. So that's what I just kind of wanted to do a quick video here today, kind of let you guys know that, reading this over the weekend, it just wanted me to talk about it a little bit here. Normally here we're talking more on the gambling side of things and that kind of stuff. Not very serious here, but again, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it. Do you agree? Do you think, listen, do you agree with Cajon and say, Dana White sometimes is just completely off the charts? It is what he does. He is a shock value kind of guy, but is he way offline, saying stuff like that? Or does it not matter? He can say what he wants. These guys are in the fight business and they need to put on a show, and that's what it is, and that's the way it should be. Let me know where you guys are in that. So there you have it. Let me know what you guys think, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like, comment, get involved. We're always talking about UFC, gambling content, and always active within the comment section. This is Mr. UFC Vegas, Fight Club TV.